I feel like we're in a golden era of indie gaming, and that quite often means that 2D platformer and adventure games are an absolute boon because it's something that's very attainable and easier for an indie developer to do. So here's a collection of fantastic games that I played on Steam Next Fest. Almost all of them are wishlisted. It's going to cost me a lot of money, and I do not care because they're great. So let's kick off with Mother Machine, a 1 to 4 player co-op action RPG platformer is how it describes itself, and I kind of agree. The idea behind this is that you are trapped in an alien world with your mother, who needs to have lots of machines plugged back in and turned online to make mother well again. But because the alien world is harsh and is full of different monsters, and you can fall and get fall damage, for example, whenever you die, you then return back to Mother, but depending on what you've collected, you can then start to mutate and, a bit like Spore, create newer versions of yourself with new skills or new attributes. And this, particularly if you're playing in co-op, will allow you to have different play styles for different characters, but also it will make traversing the world very different next time around. So some might be better at like swinging around on the vine, some might be having better jumps, some might be more attack focused, some might be a healer. And quite a lot of these attributes come with some comedic or gutter toilet humour fun that go with it. Like the healer, you fart and the stench cloud allows you to heal whilst you're inside it, for example. But it all hangs together exceptionally well. I'd also say that the physics are... they'll take a couple of minutes for you to get used to because they are slightly low gravity, but not low gravity, floaty and imprecise. It's low gravity, but still precise, with a tinsy little hint of ragdoll physics as you kind of splat around everywhere. But it was thoroughly enjoyable to play. I really like the stop-motion-y claymation attempt of graphical design in the background. It's neither both, nor neither not any of it. And it just felt unique and interesting. So Mother Machine, 2 absolute thumbs up from me. Next up is Who Wears the Crown, and I apologise for the absolutely atrocious gameplay footage this game brings. It's a chess platformer, and the idea of this is that you play as the king with a couple of pieces, trying to march up the board to get to the top and beat the AI, which will release its pawns and attacks back to you in different phases when you enter different arenas. And it's turn-based, so you'll make a move and then so will the AI. But the AI's ELO is absolutely insane. It run rings around me constantly because I was still thinking in chess format rather than platformer format, and knowing which enemy to try and pick off first because it gets very messy very quickly. So sorry for the terrible gameplay footage. I really enjoyed the concept. I just sucked at the game. Still on my wishlist though, and I'll still pick it up and be terrible at it. So yay! MultiWindows is up next, and unfortunately my game capture will not do this game justice because it blew my mind and I had a big grin on my face playing it. Like most apps, you only open them once and it becomes in a window or it goes full screen, but multi-window just opens a little tiny window on the screen. And that's okay for the first level or so as you platform around in a quite simple looking 2D platformer. And then all of a sudden you realise you can't progress. And this is where multi-windows comes in. You have to open the app multiple times, and then when you do that, it presents different layers of different types of elements of a level that you then have to arrange the windows around to be able to see the full entirety of the level that you're going to traverse. And sometimes it might mean that you need to move a window out of something to unblock a wall, or put it back in to put in some moving parts, for example, or to activate a switch. And it's a real interesting spin on a puzzle platformer in a way that I've just not seen done before. There's a game slightly similar to this in the puzzle category video that I did called Piece by Piece, which was doing this like a jigsaw puzzle. But this was like overlaying the same windows over again in really interesting ways to try and build like a layer cake of a level before you could even attempt to play it. And so the footage does not do this game justice. I loved it to bits. Absolute day one for me. Rusty Rabbit is up next, and this is a 3D world that then goes into a 2D side-scrolling action-adventure game when you get into the gameplay. And if you like mining, then this will be the game for you. In Rusty Rabbit, you play as a junkster that is basically a rabbit controlling a mech, trying to go through various different underground caves or big science laboratory areas, collecting various resources by mining rocks as you go, but that also uncovers where you need to go in the level itself, so it's a little bit like puzzle miney. Inside here you'll also find other factions of rabbits who are trying to take over some of the resources that you might want to put in their place, and there'll also be lots of puzzles where you're going to need to kind of boost your thrusters on your mech around to make sure that you can put things on a pressure plate and then get through the exit before you get to the end. The physics on this are purposefully quite stilted and heavy because of the mech that you're driving, and quite a lot of the puzzles and timing of things require good use of thrusters to get out of the way. And so once you get around that and get your mind attuned, then Rusty Rabbit becomes great fun. I would probably say that if you're not a fan of mining though, and going out and kind of doing the grind of mining lots and lots and lots of blocks, this might be less of a big sell for you. But Rusty Rabbit was good fun for me. Next up is the cute Mountain Boy, and this is all about mountaineering, and there's a couple of games like this on the list, and I'm loving this trend. Mountain Boy is doing it as an action-adventure game, seeing how you can climb up various different climbing frames before you run out of energy, and you'll be able to see the energy with when you're scampering up walls, and you need to kind of reach the next ledge before you fall off, basically, with running out of energy. There's various different click-ups for going off the kind of normal path in Mountain Boy, but I just found this a short, sharp, fun action-adventure game that just opened up climbing upwards in a new, fun and interesting way. And whilst it doesn't do anything spectacular, it's well put together, and I could see this being a good little score challenge game potentially if they start adding in like time trials and stuff like that. So big thumbs up from me, instantly playable, great physics, day one. In my quest to find a truly fantastic firefighter game, I think I might have found it, and it's called Fire Hero Pixel Rescue. This game takes a decidedly arcade retro approach to platforming in the best way possible. So each of the levels features lots and lots of fire going on anywhere, and then there's various different people that you might need to rescue. So it might be like a couple of cats in a box, and then there's an actual human. But as you traverse through the level, quite often some of the routes are impassable until you find the fire hydrant to then turn it on, and then that rises the water level in the level that will then douse out any of the fires that it then subsumes. And so you're not necessarily always going and like putting out the fire, you're selecting the fire hydrants to then drown the level so it becomes a water level. Once you then reach the human, you've then got a very specific time limit to then try and like bundle run your way to the exit. Otherwise you have to kind of go back and rescue them again type thing. And it was really challenging because the level now plays differently because of the amount of flooding that you've done in the game. I thought this is an absolutely fantastic and novel way of approaching firefighter gaming. Really tight physics and platforming action too. And yeah, I adored this. This is an absolute day one recommendation from me. Crunda is up next, and this is a physics speedrunning platformer where you're trying to leap from various different planets to planets or moons to moons, but the gravity pull of depending of like how big that planet is will change your trajectory as you're like throwing yourself off. But you've also got various different enemies or like crater moons that you'll want to miss and avoid, that you're trying to then work your way around before then doing the next leap or landing in the right place. Each level revolves around you having to collect a certain amount of pickups and then get back to an exit flag, which will only allow you to exit once you've got everything. Everything has got leaderboards attached to it, so it will make it highly competitive too. But this was a novel way of trying to do a speedrunning physics game that really clicked with me, and it was hard and it was challenging, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself. And again, it's another recommendation. You're going to find this a lot in this video, but this was a unique entry that stands out from the rest because of its visual design, but also what it's trying to do with that kind of gravitational pull game as a speedrunner, and a competitive one at that. The Alpinist is the second let's go and climb a mountain game that we've got. And this one is probably the more hardcore version of it, but equally as fun to play as Mountain Boy, and I recommend them both, but for different reasons. Whilst Mountain Boy is a more traditional 2D platformer game, this one is much more around grappling hooks and trying to work out how you can kind of chain various moves together to traverse across big gaps. Because this isn't going around various climbing frames, this is about traversing out in the wild. And so when you've got ice axes and you're starting to like slide down mountains, making sure that you've got enough room to hook on before you can then hook back up again is key. You also got the world around you that will then have storms or go dark in the night, so you need to turn on lights and lamps and try and work out where you're going. This is a much more hardcore experience, but probably more rewarding maybe as a result. And so I would recommend the Alpinist as much, if not slightly more than Mountain Boy, but both are very much worth your time. Next up is Smack Monkey, and this game's out already. It's a interesting 2D platformer that, whilst you can directly control the monkey, the vast majority of things that you're doing involves either jumping and trying to like scramble up walls if you've got enough power to do so, swinging repeatedly from vines to vines, but also timing jumps in a way, because if you get a jump wrong, or if you ever so slightly hit a wall, the monkey goes like "Arr!" and crazily rebounds off of it like a pinball machine. And so whenever you do that and mistime something and get it wrong, the penalty for it is ridiculously huge. And then you watch your monkey like just go boing off the wall, making all kinds of noises, like falling all the way back down the massive staircase that you've just desperately tried to time to get up so well. This is one of those, it's like a rage game in disguise, but I really enjoyed the challenge and found it comedically stupid. It's definitely a little bit rough around the edges, but this is a cult classic in the making, I think, with Smack Monkey, and definitely staying on my wish list, and I will be picking it up now that it's released too. Next up is Microvania, and this game I feel like desperately wants to have been born in the 1980s. It's a truly retro, like Amiga-style Metroidvania game, where obviously you'll gain various different abilities that unlock the world around you, so that you can keep going back and forth around the same different areas, exploring new things. I quite like the upgrade system. It seemed very intuitive, and it did make me feel stronger and better and faster and more agile the more I played the game. The main thing that I have with this is, because it's micro by name and by nature, everything is quite tiny. So the screen you play on is tiny, your character is tiny, the enemies are tiny, and so the hitbox detections for things were tiny too. And sometimes I felt like I was clear of something, and then I would get damage, and I'd be like, oh, maybe actually I was. And so making sure that you're definitely utilising like right to the end of something so that you can make a jump properly became a bit of a running theme the further I got into the game. And whilst it didn't detract too much from my fun, it did make me kind of question, maybe if everything was just like 10% bigger on the screen, I would feel like this would be much easier and therefore potentially a bit more satisfying to play. But still enjoyed Microvania, still on my wish list, and I intend to still pick it up. Next up is Haneda Girl, and I absolutely loved this game. It's a mixture of stealth versus brutal action, and knowing when to choose and flip from one to the other, because you play as a girl that controls a mech, but the two things can kind of be separate, and when the girl goes off and does her own thing, she can call the mech that magically reappears in front of her. But the mech is loud and noisy, but more powerful, which will then attract all of the enemies, because noise is a thing in this game, a bit like Metal Gear Solid when you're doing your stealth missions. Same thing happens here. And so if the mech kind of lands with a thud, that will alert all of the enemies that will come running, which then means that you're having to flip from stealth to action, which might not be quite in the right place or time for you, because there might be loads of turrets that then are alerted to you, and then they'll start shooting too. This was fun, visceral, lots of big explosions, lots of blood everywhere, good fun, but also everything is timed as well, so that you can get different ranks for different stages. And I really love the aesthetic of this too. It reminds me of how people in the 80s and early 90s constantly drew the future with lots and lots of different like wireframes and retro anime style. So this is a hidden gem. I absolutely loved it. 2 thumbs up. Haneda Girl, don't sleep on it. Next on the pile is Horse Runner DX, and this is an endless runner style game, but you start off as one horse, but as you complete various different missions, you unlock more horses so that you can then have like a charge of stallions and fillies all running around, jumping over various different things, and looking free and wonderful and happy. This was just a little smile in a pixel cup that I very much enjoyed for its breezy nature. I'm not going to be expecting too much from this game. It's already released out. It's definitely on my wish list, and I probably will pick it up if the price is right. So yeah, very simple, very straightforward, but I do like the theming of it, so it's a thumbs up. Next up is The Lone Sword, and when I picked up the demo for this, I initially went in thinking this was going to be a joke game. I was really surprised at how excellently well designed this game is, and it's really down to the thoughtful way of how a sword would change a puzzle platformer. In this game, your sword is exceptionally nimble, so it can float around in the air, it can do like fencing stab forwards to smash through like breakable materials, but also the enemies that you're trying to then battle through and kill to then get to next levels are designed in a way that means that you have to time when you're going to stab them or try and slash them. And so you're having to align your sword in the right way and then choose exactly when to make your attack so that you don't get too damaged about it. So you can't just go in and just like blindly flail your sword around, because that's bad tactics. And so, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this. Thought it was going to be a joke. Genuinely surprised at how superbly well designed the levels are and how thoughtful the puzzles were with this too, because there were a variety of different kind of offshoot things that you could try and do and collect on the side. Really well done, and absolutely on my wish list, and it will be a day one because it stood out as being really unique and fascinating and interesting. We're going proper early 90s now with Claire a la Mode, a single screen 2D platformer for single player or co-op. In this game, what you're trying to do is pick up various different ingredients and then throw them towards your mixing pot that will be based somewhere on the stage. In doing so, what you'll be wanting to do is to hit all of the enemies in the level at the same time, because that will eliminate them as you go. That then means that once all the mixing ingredients are in the bowl and the enemies are cleared, you can then open the exit door and escape. And so it's a real mixture of like bubble styles of level design, but with lots of throwing around, a bit like a Bomberman style thing, but just with a chef's theme. I really enjoyed this. Some of the levels also deviated from this in the demo too, to do other different things. I just found it cute and approachable, but also in that late 80s, early 90s style of really Moorish and addictive focused platforming games that I have a particular soft spot for. So this was a definite 2 thumbs up and a day one from me. Continuing on the same theme, Freddy Farmer is the 80s version of the exact same type of concept, but with something different in the twist. You can't attack anything particularly in Freddy Farmer. Instead, what you're doing is you've got a cauldron cooking pot, and all of your different crops are dotted around the level and need to be collected in a specific order. And the order is shown on the left-hand side of the screen, and you need to collect them in the right order and drop them individually back into the pot. And so what you're doing is constantly traversing up, down, left, right around these mazy levels whilst avoiding all of the enemies, because you can't kill anything. And so timing, precision, but also patience and knowing exactly when to go or when to kind of hide for a little bit is crucial and key. And also making sure that you don't bugger up the recipe, because if you do, you don't pass a level. Wah, wah, wah. So, I really enjoyed Freddy Farmer. This game came out as well in between me playing the demo and me making this video, and I have already bought it. So what's more of a recommendation than I've already gone and bought it. So expect a review for Freddy Farmer soon. Next on the list is Sky the Scraper, and this is an action adventure game because you're not strictly platforming because there's no land for you to stand on. This is a Windows cleaning game. Oh yes, we're finding all of the subgenres here, but this was oddly really fun to play. You hang off the side of the building, and what you're doing is working out with the weather what the gusts of winds are doing and how you can then swing around and clean the level as quickly as possible within the time limit so that you can get paid. You need to earn a certain amount of money to then be able to pay your rent at the end of each week, and you've got various different work shifts to get through. Alongside that, you can also use your money to unlock various different upgrades so that you can have better equipment. So that means that you can swing further and faster, or maybe clean more things as you go. And the idea is that you need to be able to scrape things off quickly before you then have to kind of swing back and just hang off of your rope to recover your stamina. So if you go too fast or too leery, the stamina bar will go down really quickly. Similarly, if you're hanging onto bricks, your stamina will go down slower than if you're hanging onto glass or a slippy environment. And so it's really thoughtful around how this game design has been put together. Very playable, very addictive, very one more go. And there's a skill tree for you to kind of unlock and make things all more powerful over time. And somewhat of a Hikikimori depressive story running along in the background. So what's not to love? Sky the Scraper, I thought, was thoroughly unique and enjoyable and an absolute day one for me. Next up is Balloon Friends, and although technically you could try and play this in single player mode, which I attempted, and that's why the gameplay footage of this is terrible, this is really a co-op puzzle platformer. The idea of this is that you're playing as two balloons that are tied together, and one can hold its breath and make the other one grow bigger and therefore rise up. And then when that one then squeezes down, the air transfers back to the other balloon. And so you're constantly working out how to platform around using the rope to move or lift various objects, or hook yourselves round so that one doesn't float off and cause the other one to go into spikes, for example. It's really well thought out, feels quite unique and interesting. And there's quite a few games at the minute that are chained together and stuff like this. This feels like a cutesy, more approachable version of that, where I think so long as you are communicative with your friend or co-op player, I don't think you'll be absolutely mind-blowingly finding this hardcore, but it was a really well put together game that is already out, and I've already bought this one too, so, thumbs up. This is why I said this list was going to cost me lots of money. Keeping the theme of puzzle platformer alive, we have Paradox, and this is a game that you have to play each level twice on. The first one is to get your actual self through to the end of a level by collecting all of the power-ups and then reaching the exit door. When you then do that, you'll then go backwards through time, and you'll have a paradox that will then need to be able to move into place to allow all of the objects that got you from A to B to actually be triggered. And that might be by standing on pressure plates, or pulling various switches, or turning on and off lasers to make sure that the corridor is now passable. And so what you're trying to do is preempt what potentially might need to be changed, and you'll get more used to what changes where and what switch triggers what as you play more of the game. But you'll kind of need to second guess yourself sometimes about what needs to be solved before you can then go and solve the level. So this game requires multiple tries on a level to get it right. Your second Paradox version that turns everything on and off has a rocket boosted cane, because it's like an old version of you, and so that allows you to jump over yourself because the two of you can't meet or touch, as well as one of the gameplay mechanics. So having a boosting cane can then mean that you can leapfrog over yourself and make sure you don't touch each other. But it also means that you can boost across the screen faster because the switches get in more stupid places that mean that you're going to have to jump and boost and try and get across to make sure, if you've not really left yourself enough time, or because some of the things are only available for you to stand on for a couple of seconds, it all kind of times together quite nicely. This game is hardcore difficult. I think it will drive a lot of people up the wall. But if you're a lover of real fiendish 2D puzzle platformers, this is the game on the list that you want to get. And it's absolutely on my wish list. I will definitely be picking it up. But it's going to be a real head scratcher as well as a platforming challenge too. If anyone enjoys ZX Spectrum-y style graphics but with a modern veneer over the top of them, and games like Pitfall, then I think Bones Beneath will be for you. This is a tricky and difficult precision platformer that requires you to really think about how you jump, dash, and use your whip to get through from A to B. So that's why I'm saying particularly Pitfall and like a 2D Indiana Jones. This is all set in the Egyptian underworld, so I really like the theming of this. The platforming is really precise and there's no after-touch movement. Where you land is where you land, but you have to be very quick on the draw with what you're expected to do, because no sooner are you in an environment, you're having to like leap over collapsible worlds or dodging various enemies or various different attacks, because so much of what's going on in this game revolves around you having to time your movements to avoid so much fire coming across the screen. So be aware this one is difficult, but it is incredibly rewarding to play if you enjoy this type of thing. Going back even further in time in terms of graphic design here, we've got Snapshot Spirit Live, which I felt like was a bit of a meta game for me. You play as a streamer that likes to fly around on their jetpack, but they're not getting very many viewers, until they spot a ghost and decide to take photos of it, and that brings the streamers in. And so this game is all about jetpacking your way through 2D landscapes and then trying to line up shots of your camera to take photos of various different types of ghosts. The more you play, the more types of camera tweaks and twists that you can unlock as you go. And this feels like a 1-bit inspired Game Boy game in the best possible way. Really easy to pick up and play. A fun kind of background story going on at the same time, and I really like how the game is designed to look like you're playing on a stream. So the game is on one side, there's a channel full of like chat from the stream on the other, but it's all part of the story as you go. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It felt cute and endearing, good fun, and I felt particularly seen when no one was turning up to chat. So yeah, definite thumbs up for me. This will be a day one. Back in the old world of a single screen arcade 2D platforming, we've got Wispy Dreams. And I enjoyed this, but I enjoyed it ever so slightly less than Claire La Mode and Freddy Farmer, and I'll explain why. In this game, which can be played in single player or co-op, you play as these characters that can kind of kick enemies around through pressing and holding the action button to then like punt them off in different directions. When they do so, they're stunned, and then you have to run to them and touch them to turn them into like food for pickups and scores. Once you've then killed all of the enemies, what it then does is unlock like a statue and a medallion, and the medallion then needs to be placed onto the statue to then unlock the next level. But this section is timed, and the screen wraps during this section. In fact, it does during the entire game, but it's particularly pertinent in this part of the game, because quite often the medallion is in a place that means you can't kick it nicely to get it onto the statue, and so you're often like pushing it off the bottom to then reappear at the top and then kind of maze its way around. I really like the concept of this, but the kicking mechanic is inconsistent, and some of the enemies will fly around the screen on the trajectory of what you've kicked them at. The medallion sometimes does and sometimes doesn't, and it felt a bit too hit and miss for me, whereas if that was solved, then this would be right up there with the other ones of this type of ilk on the list. But until that does get solved, this is slightly below the other two, but still good fun to play and good carnage. Just make sure that you get that medallion in that statue really quickly though, because otherwise a giant like death scythe starts to come in, start haunting you and trying to kill you. So you've got to be quick and you've got to be careful. Next up is Liekki, and this is a fire spirit based puzzle game. And the idea behind this is that you need to set absolutely everything on fire. So what's not to love for pyromaniacs? But the idea behind this is that you're having to work out which of your skills you need to use to be able to capture and set fire to all of the different environment that you can. So all of the vines, all of the trees, all of the flowers and the weeds need to be set on fire as you go through, and sometimes that will be by jumping and just catching onto the end of it and then watching it all catch fire. Some of it might be shooting out little projectiles or doing a dash run, and so you're always trying to look at getting 100% burn rate from whatever it is that you're doing, whilst all of the water spirits kind of watch on in horror. I'm getting a feeling of us are we the bad guy vibes as we're playing this game. I'm not entirely sure, but it was consistent fun and an interesting spin on a fast-paced puzzle platformer that made this game stand out from the crowd. And maybe I'm starting to discover my pyromaniac streak because I quite enjoyed the satisfaction of watching everything burn. So yeah, this one's definitely on my wish list. It'll be a really good day one pickup, I imagine. Liekki, don't sleep on it. Next up is extremely minimalistic looking game Tick Hop. And the interesting thing around this was I thought this was going to be like an intense speedrunner game, and it is, but everything is timed to what's going on in the game. So whenever you're looking at a level, you'll see that most platforms will have a number on it, and that is exactly when something will happen in a second countdown with that level. So it might be that a level is 10 seconds long and a platform will have 8, another one will have 7, another one will have 6 on. And they will only turn on and be usable during that second in the countdown. So it's kind of guiding you around the level, but you're going to need to be precise on your platforming to keep up. This is a really interesting twist on speedrunning precision platformers like your Super Meat Boys of this world, because it forces you to make sure that you stay absolutely in sync with the level design as it goes. And it's incredibly difficult to do, but you can also kind of see what you need to do next and make sure it's okay. And quite often you jump ahead and then you go, nope, I need to pull myself back for the next go. Or maybe you've missed a particular cue and you're running behind and then a door closes because you didn't get there in time. And you're like, grr, I was trying my best. So this is super hardcore. Really intrigued that the game itself, when it releases, will come with a level editor, and I think that is an absolute boon for this game. It's hardcore though, so just go in with your eyes open, because Tick Hop will hand your boat side back to you very quickly and very easily. Slightly suffering from the sheer variety of games that are out in Steam Next Fest this time around is the Little Pixel That Could, because I feel like this game slightly got lost for me in the fact that it replicates quite a lot of things very well that I've already seen and played elsewhere in other pixels going off and doing things style games. I quite like the idea around it's trying to delete the browser history of the owner of the PC, and so it's going across various different hard drives and firewalls to do that. And that requires lots of precision jumping, wall jumping, kind of like just general platforming challenges. But it wasn't anything new or interesting that I hadn't already seen elsewhere, and done at least to the same standard, if not slightly better too. And so I'm hoping that the overarching game itself kind of pulls together and becomes more of the sum of its parts, because there's some good gameplay here. It's just, it felt almost too much of a replica of other things that this genre has already done. And as you've seen through this list, there's so many strong entries this year that being a 7.5 out of 10 means that it almost gets lost in the noise. And that's kind of how I would rate this demo. Still good, would still recommend it, but there's other ones that I would buy first. A game that uses its mechanics to stand out from the crowd rather than its aesthetic is Sanae's Sylphid Breeze. And I describe this as, what if the Toho project did the Kirby game? Because Sanae inhales her enemies, but then takes on their ability when she inhales them. And so you're choosing which enemy to go and gobble up, so that you can then take on their attacks, for example, or perhaps it's some of their platforming abilities. It depends on the situation and what you're in. And that then means that the game keeps feeling fresh and interesting because it's throwing new things into the mix, depending on the situation you're in. That makes up for the somewhat generic-ier anime style, which comes with a lot of the Toho project games that are out there, but the key here is in the gameplay and the variety that you get. And so long as Sanae's Sylphid Breeze sticks with that and really explores that to its fullest, I think this will be a real cracker of a game when it comes out at some point in the future. The demo handled particularly well. I did run into some crashes though later on, so that's why you've got quite limited gameplay footage here. But what I played of it, I did enjoy. So Sanae's Sylphid Breeze has an interesting twist on Let's Eat It All Up Like Kirby. Stellar Poetry is up next, and this to me is what would happen if Rogue Legacy and Castlevania had a baby. And it's because this game just reminded me heavily of Rogue Legacy in the way how it plays and handles the different gameplay mechanics that are at play. But what was also interesting with this is that when you die, you can then go and recover back what you lost in terms of all of your pickups and or at least parts of it when you go and recover your ashes as you go back to where you started. This game is a Souls-like though. It is very hard. The bosses hand your bum back to you very quickly. You've got to be very on the ball with where you're going, and things do feel a little bit maze-like as well. So definitely picking up the whole Metroidvania way of how this is all built up. But it looks like one of those games that's potentially quite unassuming when you look at the gameplay and the graphics, but this plays exceptionally well and was a real challenge. So Stellar Poetry, probably one of the more sleeper hits on this list, definitely staying on my wish list, and I'll be definitely picking it up. Next on the list is Slimg, S-L-I-M-G, and this is a pocket Metroidvania, I would probably describe this as, because you're a slime that crash lands on a mysterious planet and you need to go and repair your spaceships that you can leave. And this revolves you going around various different environments, trying to pick up various pickups to then repair your ship. It was a very simple and basic platformer, and I did find some of the controls a little bit too woolly, and there was a bit of lag involved, which then meant that sometimes I didn't actually get the result of what I wanted. There's potential here though in this game, and I just think it requires a little bit more polish over time for its release, which is slated for some time in 2025. So still plenty of time to get this right. This is probably one of the least impressive games on this list for me personally though, but I did dig the aesthetic, and I think if they got the controls and the lag time reduced down, then I'd probably have enjoyed this one a lot more. But it did need to kind of stand out more than just visually about what it is that you're going to be doing in this game to make sure that it becomes more of a hook around it rather than just being a competent platformer. And what I mean by hooks from the previous entry is something that Advent Neon has spades of. This describes itself as a hyperactive 2D action platformer, and I totally agree, because this game goes at a breakneck pace, and it then adds on omnidirectional dashing, so you can kind of have real freedom of movement, and that's crucial because quite often there's parts where you're having to proper speed run through things and kind of jump, dash and avoid various different things being flown at you. But then your attacks are proper over the top too, so again going back to that hyperactive nature of things, just colour bleeding in your face. This is what I would imagine an N64 style of Sonic the Hedgehog playing and feeling and acting like, between that phase and maybe early PS2 era. But I don't say that as a bad thing. I say that as a let me embrace and hug you thing, because I adore that era of gaming. The other thing is that because this game goes at such a breakneck pace, one of the other abilities you've got is to time freeze, so that you can kind of get yourself out of mischief and trouble. I really enjoyed this. Its full-on vibrant, eye-bleeding, crazy in-your-face gameplay nature appealed to me a lot, and so this absolutely stayed on my wish list, although I did find it quite difficult to actually complete the demo because I was pretty poor at keeping up with all of the craziness going on the screen, but I had great fun trying. Keeping up with big hooks, Ninja Ming's big hook is aerial movement, and quite often when you're playing precision platformers, you've got like a dash and a double dash or something like that, or a double jump. The interesting thing with Ninja Ming is that whenever you come across environments that are going to be too wide for you or too tricky for you, you can jump, then you can dash, and then you can throw your shuriken to then teleport to wherever that shuriken is going. And sometimes you need to stop the shuriken short to make sure you don't end up teleporting into danger. And sometimes you need to time it so that you're going to shuriken and kind of do an invisible dash flash through an environment that you can't normally traverse through. And so keeping yourself in the air and then manoeuvring yourself around became one of the biggest keys of Ninja Ming to make sure that you could traverse all of the levels. This is one of those ones that's not going to look fantastic, but it plays very well. And again, with precision platforming, having consistent physics and a consistent movement is critical, and Ninja Ming has that. And so from those perspectives, I would absolutely recommend this game so far, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck in whenever it releases. Filing under perceptions can be misleading. Missing Banban looks like it's going to be some kind of weird Friday Night at Freddy's horror game, but it's actually an off-the-wall, insane cartoon 2D shoot-'em-up platformer. There's more platforming than shooting, but this is definitely towards the more action arcade platformer than being like a puzzle platformer, for example. And one of the things with this is because of the weird and strange artwork and the insane vibe that this game's going for, the artwork is stilted in a way that means that it doesn't look like your character is platforming properly, because it's got limbs that kind of connect with the environment properly. And so that took me a little while to get used to. But fundamentally, the actual jumping and the wall climbing and the shooting and the dodging actually works quite well. It's just the graphics don't really work with what you're doing. And so this is a real oddball environment. I was intrigued. I did enjoy myself playing this game. And so I think it's going to be one of those artistic, weird cult classic games that comes out where people will absolutely love it because it's proper meme worthy and stupid. And maybe a lot of other people will go, what on earth are you playing that for? But I very much enjoyed it, and it's staying on my wish list. A little bit more grounded in the real world is Botanica, which is a hand-drawn 2D platforming adventure game where you play as a seedling that then wants to take on the various abilities of the bosses and enemies that it kills so that it becomes stronger over time. This is a more traditional 2D platformer that reminds me heavily of the 16-bit era, but with nice, cute, pastel, approachable, almost cozy cute graphics design and just general theming. But fundamentally, the platforming action is here more towards the easier side of the platforming scale, but not in a total cakewalk vibe way. And so I very much enjoyed being in the world of Botanica. I think I'd like to see potentially more variety and understand where this game is going before I'd be like, you've got to buy this on day one. But it's totally stayed on my wish list and I'll be watching it with intrigue. Botanica for me was good, clean fun. Much more hardcore fun was Difficult Game About Letters. And I thought this was ingenious. In this game, which is a 2D platformer, you have the letter B is kidnapped. And so the rest of the alphabet wants to go and rescue B before the question mark king goes and steals all of them and takes them away and kidnaps them all. But what this means is that as you traverse through the world, which is like a crayon arts kids drawing, you transform into different letters of the alphabet by pressing them on the keyboard to then become that character. But then the shape of that letter means that they handle slightly differently because you've got to try and prop them up and get them through different gaps. So like turning into an I and then falling on your side can get you through tight tunnels. If you're trying to hang off of really small angular ledges, then maybe a M or a W or a Z might be more helpful, or a K. It could be that you can only just jump and cling onto the edge of like a ledge, so therefore a P or an L might be better, or a J, if you've got yourself kind of angled in that way. And so you're having to really think about what letter best suits the environment that you're in. The checkpoint system is really harsh, and so when you die it takes you back to like the beginning of a section of things that you're going to need to traverse. And so I did find this game quite difficult. The clue's in the title, Difficult Game About Letters. But I really, really loved this concept. Absolutely on my wish list, and will be a day one because I just find people being innovative in this type of way just deserves rewarding. So 2 juicy thumbs up from me. Next up is the throwback to a SNES era of platforming and adventuring, Pokettohiro. Now this game feels cookie cutter by design, and I'm not being polite about that. I'm using it almost as a problem, because Everything here works. There's nothing that is problematic, but it feels like everything we've had multiple, like hundreds of times before. And whilst I didn't find anything that was a showstopper in Pokettohiro, there's so much variety and scope and interest in so many of the other games on this list. This game just kind of fell by the wayside because I've played this game hundreds of times already. And so without any particular character or charm to make it stand out from the crowd, Pokettohiro isn't a game that I'd necessarily recommend for a day one, unless you want to really re-replicate everything that you had on a SNES old school adventure from the early 90s, in which case, go at it. But yeah, for me, this was one of the more weaker entries on this list. Pizza Boy is another game that didn't make my wishlist cut, and there's a couple of reasons why. Firstly, the demo was constantly crashing and very difficult to get any gameplay footage of at all. Secondly, there were some real issues with colour in this game for me, and there were like screens that just made my eyes really hurt that kind of made it difficult for me to play. And thirdly, I found the controlling of the platforming to be really imprecise, and quite often the move that I was trying to do just wasn't triggering. And so it was really difficult to get a read on actually what is Pizza Boy trying to do, what's the vibe it's trying to bring me, and actually how competent is this game, and is this a demo that's been released too early, for example, and therefore not being a reflection on what the future game will become. I quite like the idea of delivering pizzas to monsters in a kind of horror world, but apart from that, this was a miss on almost every level for me. And whilst I can see maybe some other people very much enjoying what this kind of Metroidvania-y platformer would be like, this one just didn't hit for me at all, and so it's not stayed on my wish list. The third and final game in my Let's Climb a Mountain series in this list is To Clean the Mountain, and this is an environmental based puzzle precision platformer, because you don't control the old man with his trash bag off to go and clean the mountain. Instead, you have to fling him, and you do this by pressing and holding a button and then kind of letting go with the trajectory, almost like you're aiming him constantly on every single step. The problem with this game, and this is very much a me thing rather than the game design thing, is that this is designed very open plan, so that if you miss one thing, you'll fall all the way back down to the bottom and lose loads of progress and go again. And I really don't gel well with those games. But if you do, and you enjoy the challenge and the frustration and the rage that comes with it, To Clean the Mountain, I think, will be a great add for you. Very personably for me, I don't gel with those games, and so I removed it from my wish list. But fundamentally, actually what's here was working very well, and it clearly has the rage bit down to a T, because I was like, what the hell, constantly when I was trying to play this, and I didn't get very far, and knew it wasn't for me because it was making my blood pressure go burp, 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 burp. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, so it's clearly doing the right job, but it's just not a game for me personally. For the exact same reason, I've removed I'd Kill You as a Worm from my wishlist too, but I got way further in this demo than I did in To Clean the Mountain. So this potentially was more fun, more engaging, but also more unique, because you've turned into a worm, your boyfriend's left you, and now you want to kill him. So what you're doing is flinging yourself and your wormy self around all of these Microsoft Paint environments, trying to get yourself from A to B to complete the game and kill your boyfriend. Now, the physics of this were funny, because obviously as a worm you'll kind of slide off the edge of things, or not quite land in a nice pile or in a straight line, so you'll kind of land like wrapped around yourself, which then requires a little mini jump to fling yourself back off and get yourself open. Or sometimes actually wrapping yourself up in a ball can help, because it means that you'll land nice and safely and not flollop off the edge of something. So definite some randomness and some stupidness and silliness in this game, but from a precision platform perspective, this was more engaging for me than To Clean the Mountain, and I got further and I enjoyed it more, but I still removed it from my wish list because I was getting angry just sliding back down again and causing myself more problems. I don't have the time or the patience for this stuff, but if this is for you, I'd Kill You as a Worm is probably a really good pick. Next on the list is Cloudy and Stormy Pawtastic Adventure. And here you play as two cats, One's called Cloudy, that has the ability to turn into a cloud and float upwards, so therefore doing much better than your average jump. And then Stormy has a lightning dash. And so what you're doing is using those abilities to get through the very different environments to go and help and save your friends and find some treasure. I really like the aesthetic. I like the cute and cozy theming of all of this. And I thought the level design actually was quite good as well, because it takes into account various different weather effects and then turns them into gameplay mechanics, which I thought was quite cool. What I didn't like so much is that the game's controls are slow and sluggish and have quite a lot of lag in them, which I didn't expect. And so this game became less satisfying to play than what I thought it was going to, because you kind of have to course correct the fact that the game has then lagged and then overcorrected what your initial input was. And so it felt like I was having to kind of nudge correct things constantly all the time, and that was getting a bit annoying. If that can be corrected though, then I think this will be a very competent puzzle platformer, or an action platformer, sorry. And so it stayed on my wish list, but it does need a little bit of work before its full release comes up at some point soon. It doesn't tell me a release date, so fingers crossed it can be sorted and improved upon. Keeping up with the dual protagonists is Astropods Starside Glaze, and this is a 2D platformer where you play as Hemi and Acro, and there are two characters that you can swap between at the click of a button. Each one has its own attacks and each one has its own unique skills, and we are trying to work out which one's best for which scenario, and sometimes swapping between them on the fly during an event. And that's kind of what kept this game feeling quite unique and entertaining. That and the fact that this is very action forward, and so lots of whipping out your mallet and smashing things to smithereens. You'll be doing it an awful lot. What's interesting with this game though is that it reminds me a little bit of, you know, when you're playing in fighting games and sometimes when you trigger a move that's really hard and with a heavy attack, there's a long kind of animation lead-in time on purpose so that someone else can kind of nip in with a quick jab and get in quick. This game's attacks are set up very much like that. And so you're working out whether you want to go for some quick jabs or get out your massive mallets and smash things to smithereens, but you might not have the time to do so. And so picking which fighting style works best in your environment is key to success in this game. I quite enjoyed this. I did find the level design quite bland though, and I think that's because of the same pixel art has been used time and time and time again. But it's the actual fighting element that makes Astropods Starside Glaze stand out from the crowd. And so it stayed on my wish list for that and that alone, more than everything else that goes around it. Again, one of the weaker recommendations I think on this list, but fundamentally nothing particularly wrong. Angry Video Game Nerd 8-Bit is up next, and this is a Mega Man style game, and if you were to buy this on release it also comes with a NES ROM of the game as well, which I thought was quite cool. But this gets the aesthetic of 8-bit platformers down to an absolute T. It also goes really hard and harsh on the penalties for absolutely anything that you do wrong. And so quite often there would be, if you upgrade your weapons, as soon as you get hit, those weapons downgrade, which then puts you at even more of a disadvantage. When you die, you lose any of your upgrades as you go along. Your health seems to carry over from level to level and not be replenished, for example. There's lots and lots of really harsh things in this game to make it a almost rage-baity title to some degree. And I get that that's probably some of the charm of the 8-bit era of gaming. I do think there needs to be a kind of modern era twist on some of this stuff, because this game felt unnecessarily harsh. What I'd also say is that it also captures some of the more annoying parts of 8-bit gaming, of like persistent enemies that you can't actually kill, just firing things at you constantly all the time. And I think we're probably beyond that from game design for things being intentionally difficult just to kind of extend the runtime of something. Let's make things proportionately difficult, I think. And so for me, Angry Video Game Nerd 8-bit has stayed on my wish list, but it's probably again down on that weaker recommendation vibe. Aralunis is up next, and my comment for this game is, just because you can make a platform level 10 minutes long with very little to do in it, it doesn't mean you should. And my problem with Aralunis is that this is a cute and relaxed and relatively simple 2D precision platformer, almost aimed at the more casual fans that want to get into precision platforming. And I do actually think there's a really good niche for that style of game in gaming. But Aralunis takes that idea and then makes each level like 10 minutes long, full of very repetitive things that you're doing over and over and over again, with very little change in the difficulty curve across that time. And so it's spreading out things to make it bigger and longer without providing the value of doing so. And so from that perspective, Aralunis wasn't a hit for me, and I have removed it from my wish list. But I do think there is an absolute market for a more casual, relaxing precision platformer, so that you don't go straight in at the like hardcore Celeste level. Another game that had a great idea but didn't quite deliver on the execution for me was Goo Hunter. This is a quite traditional pixel platformer game where you're running and jumping, avoiding spikes, getting from A to B, but you have this goo lasso that can hang on to anything that's green and gunky on all of the different ledges, and you use that to kind of swing your way around to traverse big areas. The problem is that the swinging mechanic seems to decide on different occasions whether it is or isn't going to work, and it didn't seem to be consistent in how close you needed to be and the angle you needed to be to get it to work. That then combined with level design that was trying to be more hardcore than perhaps it should do when its controls are inconsistent. And so quite often you'd be swinging just into a wall of spikes or onto a wall of spikes because it didn't trigger the goo lasso when you thought it should do. And so I found this game to be probably quite frustrating. If that all got tidied up, I think there's a semi-decent pixel platformer here, but I wasn't convinced while playing it that that was going to be reached consistently. So I've removed it from my wish list for now, but may circle back round to it if I hear good reviews of it once it's out and running. Precision and brain to hand control, I guess, is the reason why the Legend of Kuro also isn't on my wish list. This is going to be quite difficult to explain, so please bear with me. As we're going through this quite stylish looking game, you play as a samurai that can move and jump around and kill various enemies with this kind of samurai slash forward thrust movement. And most of the mechanics of trying to navigate around the levels are designed around hitting these like circular nodules with a slash going in a very specific direction. And you see these arrows popping up as you go around the levels that's going to tell you what direction you're going to slash in. The problem with The Legend of Kuro is that very quickly it decides that it wants to do double backs, and so you're slashing forward and chaining things up together, so you're kind of going like a forward and forward, and then the next one might be an up and backwards, but because there's either lag in the controls or the hand to brain coordination and timing required to be moving forward whilst also pressing and preparing for a button to send you backwards before you get there, doesn't quite compute or coordinate. The timing of everything feels wrong, and so you're pressing something, not seeing the action on the screen that you're getting, in order to make sure that the level works. Because if you stay in time with what you're seeing on screen and then changing direction, it's already too late in The Legend of Kuro, and then you'll fall into some spikes or fall off the screen, or just fail the jump entirely. And I found that disconnect really annoying. And for me as a player, I didn't enjoy the experience, and so I removed it from my wish list because the game was designed entirely around that mechanic and I didn't understand it or get it or feel like there was a flow to it. The penultimate game on this list is slideNglide, and this is a precision action platformer where you play as a winged squirrel trying to slide or glide, funnily enough, around various different environments. The graphics of this game does it no favours whatsoever, but that's not so bad if the actual action that you're performing is fun, engrossing and intuitive. You can look past graphics for that at all. The unfortunate thing is specifically the jump mechanic in this game is really inconsistent. And so sometimes I would make a jump by pressing things for a long press for a long jump. Sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes it felt like I was hitting a collision detection and would be going up and over a ledge, and sometimes I'd be going down, and I'd feel like I'd be hitting the exact same spot and not really understanding the difference. And so that meant that I was having to redo really simple things constantly over and over and over again. The sliding and gliding aspect of the game also was quite interesting too, because the level design sets you up in a way that tries to kind of coax you into, you can make this jump, and then you blatantly can't, and you just slide all the way to the bottom of the world and have to kind of make your way back up again. But again, it's that inconsistency of when you end up at the end of a slide or a glide, the jump at the end of it that you're often needing to do doesn't feel consistent at all. And until that gets right, I couldn't recommend this game, and so I've removed it from my wish list. And the final game on this list is one that has stayed on my wish list. Well done for sticking this far for an hour of game chat-throughs of 2D and platforming adventures. This game's called Echoes of Eldoria, and there's a rough gem in here somewhere, and I've kept it on my wish list more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. This game introduces loads of different gameplay mechanics, such as swinging on vines or freezing time to use falling objects as platforms, or being able to kind of do a jump and a wall jump and then a boost, and then being able to swing on the vine. And so this is a highly vertical puzzle platformer, which requires you to use the right thing at the right time. The fact that this is largely keyboard based really made it go against me, because I'm not great at platforming with a keyboard, and I do think the level design could really do with easing you in more gently over time, because this got very hard very quickly. And sometimes the sprites don't actually articulate what the collision detection is of what's going on around you. Little bit like what I was mentioning earlier on with missing Banban. The same problem applies here, where you visually are bouncing off of walls that you can visually see you're not connected to. So I was like, pardon. But with all of that said, there is something in everything that they've put together that is kind of half clicking, and I just think that over time this might become a good game. The problem is that this is currently scheduled for release in April, and I don't think that's long enough to make this a polished experience. So I'm keeping it on my wish list to see if it does improve over time to get there before I'd make this a recommendation. But Echoes of Eldoria has potential, is kind of how I would label it as. So thank you so much for watching. I didn't realise I'd covered so many of these games and was going to have to talk about them for over an hour. So really appreciate your support. If you do find games like this or lists like this really helpful, please give this a thumbs up and a comment down below, because these videos take an awful lot of time to make, and I want to make sure that they're worth the time and people enjoy them. So thank you so much. And let me know if you found anything on this list that you're going to pick up or add to your wish list too. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.